Put on a smile. There we go. So welcome everybody. So beautiful to see everybody here. We're almost towards the end of the book of Shoftim, of Judges. And as I mentioned before, and it's kind of strange because the last number of chapters actually do not have at all any Shoftim in it. But as we'll see in the first pasuk today, which was similar actually to the pasuk in chapter 17, it refers to that there was no king in Israel. And there are those mefarshim, those commentaries that say that it is actually taking place in the times of Yehoshua. And there are those that say, no, it's not taking place in the time of Yehoshua, but rather it's actually taking place chronologically after Shimshon. And there was no king, but it was referring to that there was no shofet either. In other words, shofet has not yet been, it hasn't been granted to Israel. Why? Because Shimshon actually was still alive, but Shimshon was a captive. This is, if you remember the story of Samson, he was captured by the enemy, so to speak, and tortured for a while. And this is actually in between, while he's before his death. He was still, so to speak, there was a shofet, but he was no longer dealing with what he needed to, because he was captured, and while he was still being tortured by his captives. So again, as you'll see how it fits into the text. So let's start off chapter 18, verse 1. Bayamim hahem, in those days, ein melech b'Yisrael. There is no king that resides over Israel. Uvayamim hahem, in those days, shevet hadani mevakesh lo nachala lashevet. The tribe of Dan is asking for its inheritance. So apparently, up until then, Dan has not yet conquered or has not received any land in Israel to dwell in, and it's demanding to have land. It wants to have a place that it can call its own. Why? For if you remember the way that Joshua, there were lots that were brought out to each and every one of the tribes. Every tribe had a name on it, and received the lot depending on what lot was drawn out. And apparently until this day, Dan did not receive any nachala, did not receive any inheritance in terms of land. Okay. Within the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is actually very, very interesting. And if you really, really read the text carefully in the book of Joshua, you actually find that Dan did not, true to what this text is telling us, Dan actually did not receive any inheritance in terms of land. It had apparently outside, but not within the borders of Israel. And now it's demanding to have somewhere near its brethren. Okay.
Yosi, wasn't Dan always the quote cleanup tribe that pushed everybody forward as they were moving through the desert?
It was. There's very little explanation as to what exactly is going on. But it was an interesting phenomenon that Dan apparently until this day did not yet have a place to live, and so they were living within, so to speak. They must have had somewhere to live. It's not that they were nomads still living out, but they did not have any lands that they could claim as their own. And what I mean by that as well is where they can start cultivating, building cities, building infrastructure, etc. There was nothing that was their own, and they wanted, and they had a claim. They said, we want to have. So what do? Vaishlechu mivnei Dan mimishpachtam chamisha anshim mikzotam. So what did the tribe do? They sent 5 men from their tribe. Bnei Chayil. These were warriors, strong men. They sent them from Tzar'ah Umeshtaol, from these 2 cities. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
So if you remember, the whole story of Shimshon starts of Bnei, right? There was a family from the tribe of Dan who lived Mitzorah Umeshtaol. He lived in this area. So this is This is where the Mefarshim, those that commentaries that feel that this is still in the days of Samson, say the whole theme is connected to the story of Shimshon. And so they're sending it. They were living apparently in that area around Sorah and Eshtaol, that area. And they sent 5 men, L'Leragel et Haaretz Ulchokra, in order to go and explore and spy out the land. Vayomru alehem, the leaders of the tribe of Dan charged these 5 spies, and they told them, Lechu chikru et haaretz, go and scout out the land. Vayavo har Ephraim ad Beit Micha. They happened to come to the Har Ephraim, to the Mount of Ephraim, where? To the house of Micha, Vayalinu Sham, and they actually slept in the house of Micha. So we were introduced to Micha in chapter 17. That was the whole story of stealing money from his mother and then creating some idols. And then, if you remember, a Levite happened to be walking by, and Micha offers him a job and to hire him and to make him the priest. And basically, he creates somewhat, if you want to say, his own religion. Okay, so this is who they have reached. They reached the house of this gentleman Micha, and they slept there. Hema Beit Micha, they are around Micha's home. Vehem hikiru, suddenly they recognize and call Hanar Halevi, that speech, that the voice of that Levite, which he hired, which Micha hired to be as his priest. Vayasuru Sham, and they walked towards the voice. They walked to where they heard the voices, and they met this gentleman. Vayamrulo mi heviacha halom. Who brought you here? How do you end up in this place? Uma atause, what are you doing here, Bazeh? Uma lechafo, what business do you have being here? So, how do they recognize his voice? What are the chances of Bnei Dani recognizing this Levi? So. The commentaries explain that what they understood, they heard lingo. In other words, they understood what they understood what this Levi was saying, and they recognized that this was some kind of service to God, and they recognized the davening, if you want to say, and they were intrigued. And what's this type of lingo doing here? And that is what they're asking him. What are you bringing all this type of prayer, all this type of kehuna to this place? What are you doing? Vayomer alehem, and he answered him, Chazo v'chazeh, thus and thus asali Micha, and he explains him the whole story that Micha hires him, vayis kareni vayilo lechohen, and he hired me, and now I'm his priest. Okay. So he's basically told him the whole story, that now he is the one who's running the temple which Micha has set. So now they have an idea. These 5 men from Dan, Vayomrulo, they told him, Sh'al na velohim v'neda, we want to ask you something. Since you're the priest here, we want to ask you the following. We charge you, please ask God, because we want to know, Hatatzliach darkenu asher anachnu holchim aleha, will we succeed in our mission which we are on? So in other words, they want to know what he has to say, what his God has to say. Vayamru lahem, and vayomer lahem hakohen lechu l'shalom, and this kohen, which is actually a Levi, but now it's all a pretend, tells them, go for peace. You
are wonderful.
For God views with favor the mission that you are going on. Okay, so now let me just do this. It's gonna be a little bit easier. Excellent. So he tells them, go out, because continue on your way, for you will be successful in your endeavor. And if you see a little pay, all right, the little pay refers to that as the end of the first story within this chapter. Okay, so Vayelchu chameshet hanashim, these 5 spies continue on their way, and where do they reach? Vayavo Loisha, they reach this city of Laish, Vayru et ha'am asher bekirba yoshevet lavetach. And they noticed, and they were spying that the populace there were living in a very carefree, very secure place. They had no worries. Kemishpat Tzidonim shoket uvoteach. They lived just as the Tzidonites, Sidonians, lived, with a lot of tranquil and with safety. In other words, they had no worries there. Now the Tzidonim, if you know where they were, they actually lived much more north. They lived around in Lebanon. These were. Why do they bring Sidonim here? What's the connection? These are not Sidonians, but these are actually people who were successful. They had a beautiful society. They were successful business people, and they also lived by the sea. So we're going to find out shortly. I will show you what area of Israel they are actually in. But the Sidonim were seafarers. They lived usually by ports. So this must be also near the sea. So they're kind of comparing how what they're seeing to society that they're aware of, and they were aware of the more famous Sidonim, and they're comparing it and saying, wow, this is very similar society, just like them. Ve'ein machlim davar ba'aretz yiresh etzer. And they lived carefree in the sense that there was nobody there to hurt them or to molest them. And they had no hereditary ruler. In other words, they did not have a hierarchy of rulership. They had an open society in which they all, as a group, made up the rules or the way that they would rule. It was not one person, and that followed. That was the way that the kinship was formed in this particular society. Moreover, they were distant from the Sidonians. In other words, they did not live near them, and they had no quarrels, nor did they have any dealings with the outsiders. So they were somewhat of a closed society. They didn't have many strangers living within their borders, so to speak, or within that area, but they had no threats to their way of living. But they lived in a very organized society. And once the spies gathered up all this data, they returned back to the brethren, Tzorah ve'Eshtaol. They returned back to Tzorah and Eshtaol. Vayimru lahem achehem ma'atem. And their brethren asked them, what have you seen? What was your mission? What have you gathered? Vayimru. And the spies told them, Kuma v'nale alehem. Let us go once and attack them. Attack what we have seen, Kira'inu et ha'aretz, for we have seen the land, ve'hinet tova me'od, and it is absolutely magnificent, it's great. V'atem machshim ve'al te'atzlu. And you are sitting here, you're being idle, you're not being active, you're not being proactive. Do not be idle. Lalechet lavo lareshet et haaretz. Let's go invade the land. Let's possess the land as God has given us. So they're telling him, let's go, let's hurry, let's not waste any more time. It's within our grasp.
Yeah, see, they're approaching this as if they were outsiders and not part of Bnei Israel in the first place.
So it's interesting. They were not dwelling. They have not yet received any formal dwelling places. They said, now it's our turn to stay proactive. We need our own place. It's very unclear as to what exactly this time of where it's taking place. Shortly towards the end of this parak, towards the end of this chapter, we will see once again where there's some descriptors to give us an idea of at which time or what period it's given, but it can be read in different manners, and then it will change as to the period that it is in. So it's kind of it's a strange. I learned from this that it's really more to learn less so about historically the events in the sense of what year it was and chronologically when did it take place, under whose rule, etc. It's more in terms of to give us the idea that the land was actually not yet conquered. Not everybody yet had land. They were not settled. And that is also why the Israelites were not yet in communication with one another. What I mean by that is you'll see that there's a reference to the temple, or at least in that time it was the Mishkan yet, because Jerusalem was not yet built. So, and it was far away, and they were still disconnected. The whole country was not yet connected in one. And that is why also Micha, we understand why Micha kind of makes himself a god, because there was no real place to go yet. They haven't yet established themselves in Israel, so to speak. If you want to say the infrastructure was not there, and so they almost were very segregated from another. If you were far away from the center, understand? So this is kind of the picture that I think that these last chapters are trying to paint for us. Okay, to understand kind of the idea of how they were still, this society was built. Okay, so he's telling them, let's go. When you get up, when we reach our destination of Laish, you will actually see that there is an unsuspecting peoplehood that live there. In other words, they're living like nothing's wrong. They're not suspecting anything. They're going about their business as usual. Rachavat yadayim v'haaretz rachavat yadayim, and you will see that the land is vast. Kinatna Elohim be'etchem, for God will deliver this in our hands. Mekom asher ein sham machsor, in a land that there is nothing lacking, nothing missing in this land. This is a very a fruitful and a very, this is not a desolate, desert-ish, but this is a very a land that gives everything up. There's nothing missing there. Kidavar Shaar ba'aretz, there's nothing. Everything is there. This is a very rich, very desirable grounds. Vaisu misham mishpachat adani, and so they departed from there, from Mitzar'ah u'Meshtaol, 600 ish chagur klei milchama, 600 strong, and they are carrying weaponry, and they are ready to go into battle. Vayalu vayachanu bekiryat Yarim biYehuda, and there they go up and they encamped in Kiryat Yarim in Yehuda, and that is why al ken karu lamakom ahu machane dan ad hayom hazeh. And where they camped, they nicknamed that place Machane Dan, the camp of Dan, until this day. Hine acharei Kiryat Yarim, it is just west of the town of Kiryat Yarim in Judah. So they nicknamed it for what they used it. Okay. Vayavru misham har Ephraim, and they crossed from there through the hills of the country of Ephraim. Vayavo ad Beit Micha, and lo and behold, they arrived once again at the house of Micha. Vayanu chameshet ha'anashim ha'olchim leragel et haaretz laish. Here, the 5 men who had gone to spy originally remarked to those that have joined them, so the 600 people there. Vayimru lachehem, and they declare to all the brethren that have joined them. Haidatem, do you know? Are you aware? Yesh babatim ha'ele, in this complex here, which, if you remember, Micha in last chapter, Micha built a couple of buildings, almost kind of, if you want to say, type of like a monastery, a temple, and he built all these almost like a fake town, so to speak, to build to give a grandeur to the religion that he was establishing, or to at least the way that he saw the religion, or what he was, the God that he wanted to put forth. He told him, do you see all these buildings here? Do you know what there is in these buildings? Yes, there's ephod, utrafim, ufesel, umasecha. There's an ephod. There are idols. There are oracle idols. There are all these worshipped items. These religious items. Let us know. I have an idea. We have an idea of what we have to do with these religious objects. What do they do? Vayasur shama, vayavo el beit hanar halevi beit micha, vayishulo leshalom. And so This is going to be their plan. They go into the house of Micha, and they enter the house, or they go to the house of the Levi, that same Levite that is being that is actually the Kohen, or the priest, for Micha's religion, for Micha's temple. And they ask him, how are you doing? And he greets them well, and he says, everything is peace, everything's great. The 600 ish chagurim klei milchamtam. The 600 soldiers were girded with their weapons of war. They had them ready. Nitzavim petach Hashomayim. They stood at the entrance of the gate. Mibnei Dan. These were the 600 from the tribe of Dan. Vailu chameshet anashim halchim leragel ta'aretz. Those 5 original spies went up. Ba'u shama. They entered the house. Latchu et hapesel ve'et ha'efod ve'et ha'trafim ve'et ha'masecha. They confiscated all those religious items. Ve'hakohen, and the priest, nitzav petach hashar, and suddenly the priest, recognizing what is being done, that his temple is being looted, he stands at the entrance of the gate, but he realizes v'shesh me'ot ha'ish shechagur klei hamilchama. He realizes that there are 600. He's certainly outnumbered. There are 600 men that are dressed for war, prepared for war. Ve'ele ba'u beit Micha. Again, those 600. They came up to the house of Micha. Vayikhu et hapesel ha'efod ve'et ha'trafim ve'et ha'masecha. And as they're taking these items, Vayomer lahem hakohen ma atem osim. What are you doing? Why are you ransacking this temple? Vayomru lo hacharesh sim yadcha al picha v'lech imanu. And so they warned him. They said, listen, be quiet, put your hand on your mouth, in other words, shut your mouth, and follow us, and come with us. And you know what? Why don't you be for us as a leader, as an Av, somebody who we look up to, as a father? Interesting, by the way, like in Christianity, that is what they use, right? The father is the priest is they use the term of father. I wonder if maybe something is they get it from here. But he says, be just as Micah told him, be for us as a father, ul kohen, as a priest. Is it better for you to be here, the priest for one man? Or why don't you be come and be a priest to an entire tribe of Israel? In other words, now they're going to be hiring this gentleman, this Levi, this Kohen that has been in only for Micah. Now they're giving him a proposition. Why are you in this small congregation of one household? Come and be the priest, the father, the leader, religious leader to an entire tribe.
Yes.
Yes.
Why would they want to align themselves with a priest that was in fact guarding idols and basically defying Torah teaching?
Excellent. So excellent. Does anybody want to attempt to answer that? Anybody want to attempt that?
Yosi, I'm going to speculate that they saw him as a protector.
Okay, absolutely. So this is what, if you remember my words at the beginning, this entire episode, the last couple of chapters are really painting the downgrade or the disengagement of what we know as a religion right now. You go to a city, there's you can go into I'm talking about a city where there are Jews, and there's some structure to it. You can find shuls, you'll find semblance of an organized structural religious basis. So in other words, somebody visiting Montreal, there'll be bakeries, there'll be kosher restaurants, synagogues, Jewish schools. We're blessed with a Jewish hospital that serves kosher food, etc. There's structure, but that took obviously over time and money, etc. But there was a structure in which these were built in. The land was still so young that really there was this disconnect. Don't forget, it's not like, you know, they can make a phone call or get in touch or send. There were really no roads yet. The cities were not yet established. They're going ad hoc. And so they also wanted to have a semblance of an organized religion. And it might not, for us from the outside, we see it as of course, paganism and improper, as you rightfully say, Peter. They're not following the structure that we know should have been followed. But this is also why they were sinning. You know, this was the cyclical. If you remember, the cyclical of the entire theme of this book is they fall into a sinning pattern by not following God's ways or God's instructions. They cry out after they are being, you know, usually God sends out somebody to terrorize them, whether it's a foreign nation, etc. But there they are, they're being terrorized. They cry out, and God sends a shofet in order to save them. And this is kind of a little bit of a backdrop of showing us a little bit of how this maybe disengagement was created. It's not suddenly they just decided not to follow the ways, but seeing the people that live around them, still seeing those foreign nations that still lived in the land, plus their disconnect from Shiloh or where the Mishkan was. They kind of tried to set up or mock a little bit of that religion to themselves. So in other words, that is why, what did Micah build? He built a ephod. That is what the priest had. Trafim, just some kind of things, that idols that they can relate to. Because just to show that they're not disconnected, but they're not, in fact, it was a double-edged sword. They want to show that they're religious, so to speak, or following the rules, or connected with God, but it's the wrong way that they were going about it. Maybe the intention was actually okay, but they were going about it the wrong way.
Yosi,
And then that's why God punishes them. So,
Yosi,
yes.
sorry, doesn't it also show that it's all chaos? Might
Right.
is right.
That's what I'm saying. It's all disconnected. It's discombobulated. There is no yet. The whole country is not yet connected. It's very early on that they're not having such an easy way of establishing regular, organized society. It was very, very fractured. And now the Danese also want, as they're moving away from the center, right? The Shevet Dan also wants to have some kind of a, if you want to look at it, they also want to build a synagogue, so to speak, and have the ability to practice the religion. And they see, hey, why be for only one man? Come and be our leader, our religious leader for an entire tribe. So that is, and of course, they're thinking, listen, if we don't want to lose our religiosity, so to speak, or our connection with God. So they actually want, as Michael said, they want to be connected with God. Unfortunately, they're setting it up in the wrong way. Maybe it was lost over a couple of generations in terms of the, wasn't transmitted, or they didn't remember how it was, and they borrowed elements from the people that lived around them. But they remember certain things, as you can see. The Micah certainly built an ephod, and the funniest thing is one of those things is pesel. They built pesel masecha, some kind of statue, but also some kind of mask. And if you remember specifically in the 10 Commandments, it says, Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel u'masecha. Do not make for you pesel u'masecha, those same two things. But sometimes, what you're told not to do, sometimes you think it's, oh, 1 second, aren't we supposed to have that? I remember something about a pesel and masecha. Maybe they forgot about the low part, then do not do that, but they remembered those words, pesel u'masecha. And here you have Micah building, there's not the same Micah, by the way, the prophet later on, it's a different guy, but these two words are ringing. Trafim, if you remember, where do we have the word trafim? Anybody want? These are not truffles, by the way. But where is trafim? Where do we have the story of trafim? Specifically, that word. Anybody wants to get?
Does it go back to Terach?
That story with Terach is more of Agadah. we weren't really told about trafim. Where is the word trafim literally mentioned in the Torah? Anybody remember?
Yeah, with Rebecca.
Not quite Rebecca, but somebody.
I think it's mentioned in the story with Rachel and Laban.
Rachel.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think there's also Trafim in the story of King David in the book of Samuel.
Yes, that's later on, but I'm talking about specifically in Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Trafim is mentioned correctly with Rachel, if you remember, after they Yaakov, he creates his own wealth, and he realizes that Lavan and Lavan's workers and Lavan's family is looking down at him. They decide to flee at night. You remember? And he takes they take all of their belongings and they flee. And when Lavan, after leaving the compound wherever they lived, because they went to shear all the wool from the sheep, and then they hear that Yaakov has left. Lavan chases him down, catches him, and he asks him, "Why did you leave?" And in that story, there's a whole story that Rachel stole the trafim that belonged to her father, and she hid them, if you remember, on, how do you call it, in the
saddle, and she sat on them.
Exactly, on the camel. So that's the story. So again, we have these religious items that, or specifically that word trafim. So we have ephod, which was the breastplate. We have trafim, which were mentioned in the Torah, but in a negative light. Okay, and then we have again pesel umasecha, which is literally mentioned in the Ten Commandments, and then later on as well, when with the golden calf, it's mentioned once again. But in that light, all these are catchwords. They're not just, he made himself something else. These are specific words. And maybe it was lost over the generations, the not part, not making them, they just could not handle not having any esoteric type of religion where it's a belief where there's nothing physical, so to speak. They had to actually have something that they can see, something that they can attribute godliness to or belief in. They couldn't separate from that, and of course the influence of those that lived around them. Yes, Miriam.
But this was a way of having a bloodless invasion.
A bloodless in terms of?
Well, they didn't have to fight.
What? No. So far, we're not yet. We haven't yet reached Laish. This is just in the house of Mika.
Oh, just.
So you wait. You're gonna have the gores coming soon. So don't worry. I'm sorry, but
Maybe they thought they would have a bloodless invasion.
They wanted to have God with them, so to speak. They want to have the spirit of protective spirit, as Michael, I think you were saying you were moving on that. And so what do they want? They want to have God on their side. And so what they do is they want to take these religious items. He must have built something that was impressive, not just a little, in the corner. And they saw, wow, this guy has a temple. We want these, this is something that we want. And they're offering the Kohen to come, the Levi, who was acting as a Kohen, to come and be their religious inspiration and guide, because they want God's protection, especially after they hear, what did the Kohen tell them? God has told me that you will succeed. Would you not that's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear that you're not going to succeed, and God forbid, the calamities that will come to you. You want to hear the positives, and so they want to hire this guy. They want to bring it. So that is the reason why, as well, Micah has it. And if you remember at the end of Micah, he kind of prophesizes that God is going to bless him. He blesses him, that God blesses him. In other words, he makes it's kind of funny in terms of the way that it's no longer an outside force. He really becomes the voice of God, so to speak. In other words, it's made up, and he can do whatever he wants. And that was the irony of the entire thing. But perhaps again, it was done. Why? Because, as Henry said, the entire society was still so splintered and disconnected from various limbs in terms of, and one of those was religion as well. So let's continue. So Vaitav Leva Kohen, the priest was delighted. He actually liked that offer of moving, and rather than being the priest for just one person, he liked that offer of becoming the priest for the entire Shevet of Dan. Vaikach et ha'ephod, and he himself takes and transports the ephod, v'tatrafim, v'tapasel, v'yavo bekerev ha'am, and he joined in the center, within the midst of the entire camp. So in other words, he joins now there was marching men, the 600 warriors. Vayfnu v'elchu, and they set out once more, and they set out. Vaysimu et hataf et hamikneh v'et hakvuda lifnehem, placing the children, the cattle, and the household goods in front. Hema hirchiku mibeit Micha. They already had made it quite a great distance. They were quite far from the house of Micha. V'anashim asher babatim asher beit Micha nizaku. And suddenly, all of Micah's neighbors, those that dwelled with him, were within his clansmen, they suddenly realized that something has occurred. They realized that there was something missing, and Vaidbeku et Bnei Dan, and they decided to chase, and they caught up to the Danites. Vaikreu el Bnei Dan, vayesebu fnehem, and so they called out to the Danites, and turned around and said to Micah, Vayimru Micha, ma lecha ki nizakta. So they were yelling out to the pursuers. In other words, those who were with Micah caught up, and they started calling out to the Danites. And the Danites turned around and they answered Micah, and they said, "What do you have that you are chasing after us? What is your grievance with us?" Vayomer, and Micah yells out to them, "Et Elohai asher asiti lekachtem, the lekachtem vet hakohen." Those gods, those idols which I have made, you've taken, and the priest. In other words, you've taken my whole established religion. Vatelchu maliod, and now that you've walked off with this, what do I have left? You've emptied me. Mazeh, what is all this thing? Tomru elai malach. So why are you asking? What's my grievance? You just did all this stuff for me. Of course I have a grievance with you. You've taken all my stuff. Vayimru elav bnei Dan, and so the bnei Dan retorted to him and answered him, Al tashma kol chaimanu, do not raise your voice to us. Do not yell at us. Pen yifga'u v'chem, for we may hurt you. Anashim marei nefesh, you pity, you people who are mar is bitter. You're bitter people. V'asafta nafshecha v'nefesh beitecha. If you continue to yell at us and have a grievance with us, be careful, for we will kill you. You're endangering yourself and all the people that you've brought with you. In other words, basically telling him, take off, just get lost. You're outnumbered, you're outgunned. Just leave, and your life will be spared. The Danites continued on their way. Vayar Micha ki chazakim hema mimenu, and Micha recognized that he was simply outgunned. They were much stronger than he was. Vayifen vayashov el beito, and so he turned home and returned back to his home, I guess with his tail between his legs. And the hema lakchu et asher asa Micha, they continued to take that which Micha had made, v'ta kohen asher hayalo, and as well the priest. In other words, they relented on nothing. They gave back absolutely nothing. They took everything that Micha had made, including the Kohen. Vayavo al Laish, and they arrived at the city of Laish. Al am shoketu voteach, to people that were tranquil and unsuspecting. And what happened? And Miriam, here's your Vayaku otam lefi charev, and they put them to the sword. Ve'et ha'ir sarfu va'esh, and they burnt down the entire city. Ve'ein maitzil, and no one had come to the rescue or to help these the residents of Laish. For it is a very, very, very far from Tzidon. They had no real connection. They were not connected with any other society. In other words, they were living a self-contained society. Vehi ba'emek asher levet Rechov. It lay in the valley of Bet Rechov, and the Danites, Vayivnu et ha'ir, Vayesh vuva, and the Danites proceeded to rebuild the city, and this is where they dwelt. So in other words, they basically got rid of they wiped out the residents. They did not put up a fight. They were unsuspecting. I suspect that also they were far enough from people, from civilization, other civilizations, that they really were not aware or did not were not up to date as to what was going on in the land. Vaikru Shem Ha'ir Dan, B'Shem Dan Avihem, they named this city Dan after their forefather, of course, Shevet Dan, Asher Yulad LeIsrael. So this is the first. It's interesting. This is mention of the original Dan, their original ancestor, Asher Yulad LeIsrael, who was born to Israel, to Yaakov. Ve'ulam Laish Shem Ha'ir Larishona. However, the original name of the town was Laish. And let's Vaikimu lahem b'nei Dan et hapasel, and the Danites proceeded to set up this sculptured image for themselves. In other words, now that they've gone through the war, they're rebuilding. They've established as well some kind of a temple, and which they went up and they addressed and they put up this sculptured image. V'Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe, hu uvanav hayu chwanim l'shevet hadani. And now we finally learn the name of who that Levite is. Who is that Levite? Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe. This is the name of that Levite that they brought in. His name is Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Menashe. Him and his sons were the Kohanim, were the priests, were the religious entity, were the spiritual directors to the tribe of Dan. Ad Yom Gelot Haaretz, until the land went into exile.
Yosi,
Yes.
I googled Jonathan, son of Gershom, and they say that is the son of Gershom, son of Manasseh, and they imply that Manasseh is Moses, and Jonathan therefore was the grandson of Moses. I googled it.
So it's a very interesting thing. If you look, that's very nice. If you look at the way I was waiting for Michael. Michael usually asks this question when there's an anomaly in the way that things are written. And let me show you. So we have here.
Oh, that's, yeah.
We have here. Look at the way it's written. Henry, what did you just say before?
I googled it, and Jonathan. Well, Moses had a son called Gershom.
So look. If you do you see the small nun here?
Where is that? Oh, yeah.
Do you see it? Do you see how it's written? But
Yeah.
if you look at just at these letters, what is
I
it?
thought it was a bracket. It's a, Yosi, it's a,
Ben Gershom, Ben Moshe.
Ben Moshe. Do you see it?
and show,
It's an allusion to exactly what you are saying. This is a nun. If you look at it closely, it's a nun.
oh, I thought it was a bracket.
Yeah. Do you see it? Menashe.
Now I see
Nun.
it, yeah.
In the text, it's actually written very small and above a line. In other words, something here is hidden in the text. In other words, it's kind of like an asterisk, or like if you have like a little number 1 or number 2, and you have to read below the line, and they actually fill you in as to the story.
So Yosi, does this pasuk get incorporated into a Haftorah?
It does not.
Oh, so there's no question of how it's chanted.
No, nothing to do with chanting. The chant, by the way, this is the note for the chant. It's right here.
Yeah. The Gershayim, yeah.
Yes, not Gershayim.
Isn't that Gershayim?
No. It's
Oh, no,
kadma.
it's not. Pazar. Yeah.
It's kadma
From the
ve'azla.
odds. Yeah. I thought I saw.
It's kadma ve'azla. But
Oh, Pazar. Yeah, you're
but
right. Yeah.
it's the way that this is spelled. So
So what does the nun mean there?
so if you read it, the name is Ben Menashe. Do you see it? Son of
Yeah.
Menashe. But the way that it's written, it's not really written in an organized, regular way. The nun should have been like this,
Yeah.
Even a full-size
like
note.
that, and like that. Menashe. Do you see
Right.
it? But now it's written in a very strange way. And there are other, by the way, areas in the Torah as well. Vaikra, the book of Vaikra begins with, there's a little aleph. So Bereshit has a big bet. Sometimes there are small letters. A couple of weeks ago, when we were reading Behalotcha, we had nun, there were backwards nuns. There are a couple throughout the text where there's other big letters, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We have the Ayin that is big and the Dalet that is elongated and big. Again, they're all these reference or an allusion to something grand. And here we have, as Henry mentioned, we have the letters Mem Shin Hey sticking out big to tell us that this could be the son Gershom ben Moshe, not necessarily ben Menashe, but they have lost where it is, because who was Menashe, by the way?
Moses.
Matthew as
No,
a
who's
Manasseh.
Right.
Who's
Menashe. Ephraim ben Menashe. It's one of the sons of Yaakov.
But, no. Who were Ephraim and Menashe?
The two tribes are on the other side. The two tribes on the other side of the.
Joseph's son, no?
Joseph's sons.
Yeah, but right there, the
Joseph's
two.
son was Menashe.
Right, but they're also the tribes on Ephraim and Menashe, the
Joseph's
two side of the river.
Right, but
Yep,
Menashe and
Menashe,
Ephraim were the children of
Of
Joseph.
Joseph.
They have
Joseph,
nothing to do with Kehuna, nothing to do with being a Levite. Levite was a Shevet Levi. Who came from Shevet Levi?
Moses.
Moses
That's
and
right, and
Aaron,
Aaron too, yeah.
as well as other families. But here we have Gershom, which was Ger Haiti
Moses' son.
Nochriah, right? For I was, if you remember, one of the sons of Moshe was Gershom.
Yeah,
Ki ger Haiti be'eretz Nochriah. For I'm a sojourner in a
Stranger,
foreign
yeah.
land. And Ben Moshe. Moshe was a Levite. So through the text, the name Menashe somehow fell in here, maybe because he came from, if you remember, the Levites didn't really have a place where they were living. Perhaps he came originally from Menashe, so he kind of assumed that name. Almost he came from living there, but that's not actually what his lineage is. But the text alludes to Gershom ben Moshe, and that is why he was a Levite. Do you see it clearly in the text? The Mem Shin Hey that stick out? It's a very interesting. It's beautiful how very simple in terms of, we didn't have, the Torah is not written with highlighting or, with italics or with bold. Well, there are bolds because there are big letters and small letters, but you can see if you look at it, it looks like Gershom ben Moshe. So it's you can look at it in two ways. So thank you, Henry, for pulling that out. And the last thing I want to,
yeah, see, before we go on, it says until in the Gelo Ta'aretz, does that mean all the way to the time of the destruction of the first temple?
excellent. If you notice, I just put brackets around there, and I want to actually explain what exactly does that mean. Ad Yom Gelot Haaretz, until the land went into exile. Again, this is a little bit more complicated. If you remember at the beginning, I gave you a little bit of a pre telling you that even towards the end of this parak, there's going to be again a little bit of a strange twist, depending on how you actually look at the text and the way you interpret it will change what the mening is.
And
So
you had warned us about reading it in a historical context necessarily.
Right. So one group of scholarship holds that exactly, Michael, as you said, until they were finally exiled. That is the way that the Daniyah, or that area, actually the religion was performed. Was they had this Kohen and these pestles. They had all these imagery, all these built that Micha build. This was the religious order then. until
So in other words, the idea is that they were contrary to what was going on at the temple in Jerusalem.
right, in terms of they were disconnected. They were literally disconnected. And now if you want to start thinking of, I don't know if you've ever questioned yourself and said, how is it possible that there was, Judah and the rest of Israel? Why were they, why was there that civil war, that disconnect of the north and the south? How did they split up? And if you start looking at it, this was type of a behavior that they passed on to generations. So guess how their children, how did they practice the religion? That's what they grew up with. They didn't know any better that there was a temple and what you're supposed to do in Moshe. They grew up being Jews like that. That is what that is how they knew the religion, because of the disconnect. There is another explanation. Ad Yom Gelot Haaretz. If you remember in the text with David, at one point there was a fight, and the Ark of the Covenant was actually taken over by our Oyev, by our, if I'm thinking of Philistines, if I'm not mistaken, was taken until David actually goes and retrieves it again. Not really retrieves it. Everybody dies. Anybody who comes within the proximity of the Ark suddenly dies. And so they just left it aside. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to do it until David goes out and retrieves it again. And that is, by the way, there is a haftarah on that one, Michael. Okay, where the ark is being brought back into David, if you remember, and Uzzah places his hand on it, and he dies, and he's dancing. David is dancing in front of the ark, and his daughter says, "How my father is embarrassing us. He's supposed to be the king. Why is he being so?"
His wife, Michal. Sorry.
Exactly. So you have all this. So some say that this is what they're referring to. In other words, until the ark was not returned,
Until that second time that David takes it.
This is how exactly, because when David finally takes over, and it's the idea of bringing the religion into
Yerushalayim, it comes to fruition. Well, under
and building
yeah.
exactly, and finally having a structure to the
Yeah.
religion. That is when people actually, or the entire populace, started having more of the old way of doing things. They had a temple. They had a central religious center where they started following again back to the old days. But until then, it was very splintered. They all had little regions of how they did it. And now it's almost backwards, but we understand why the land was as such, that they kept on falling into these lulls of, being not following God's ways. God gets angry at them, etc. But they really were lost in a way. And they kept on falling until they didn't have this a savior, so to speak, if you want to say, in the form of a shofet, a judge, or in those days they were seen as a leader. Without a leader, they were lost. They could not, they could not conceptualize the religion, or what I believe is they simply were not educated enough and knew kind of what the religion was. That is why Micha goes out and hires a priest. Understand? In terms of somebody. And that is why the Daniz, if you remember at the beginning of this chapter, they recognize the voice. It's not that they recognize the voice that he was mimicking somebody and he had a particular, interesting or unique sounding voice, but the lingo that he was using, they recognized that it was some kind of priestly lingo. And that is why they were intrigued with it. And they offer him that. Again, they wanted to have that religion. Okay, so now we have this structure that the Daniz, the Shevet Dan is putting in their camp, in their land, and it's again contrary to what it should be. Okay, let's continue, and then we'll finish it off. Vayesimu lahem et pesel micha shirasa, and so they placed as a worshiping or as a central religious figure this pesel, this sculptured image that Micha had made. Kol yemei hiyot beit Elohim b'Shilo, all the days that the house of the Lord, so to speak, the religion was in Shiloh. Okay, so we don't see. Yeah, so those page pasuk 30 and 31 are a little bit we have to read them kind of together. We don't know whether it's while the Mishkan was still in Shiloh. If you remember, it actually moved in various places. It was not always in Shiloh. It was moving around, and then finally it went to Shiloh, and then David is the one who brings it back to Shiloh.
So in other words, Yosi, in other words, 31 is answering the question up to 30 as to what Ad Yom Galot Haaretz means.
Not necessarily, but it gives it lends itself more towards until yes and no.
And not to all the way till 586 BCE necessarily.
Exactly. But there's some that
Yosi, could you comment on the killing of everyone and destroying the town? A couple of words on that.
in terms of.
Well, it doesn't seem to be a very humane thing to do. Did God demand that?
So I think again this is the difficulty, and I think we spoke about it. Miriam had has brought it up, especially when we were reading the book of Joshua, and we saw how the conquering took place, and literally was wiping out villages, wiping out towns. That was or burning a town down. It's not what the norm that we today see it. This was what was done in those days in terms of that was the norm in terms of when the conqueror would take over. That is how it was done. There are those that say that they had the opportunity to basically tell them to get lost. Most of the time they said, no, this is our land. And then the fight breaks out. What do you do when a fight breaks out? Somebody's going to be victorious, right? So it's not an easy read for us today. But I see as well, I think Johan and Clara, I'm not sure if they want to comment. So please comment if it's something on this.
Thanks, Yosi. I think that the question that was now asked, I maybe loved very much. Sometimes the questions are better than the answers, It's a very serious question. And I like to talk a lot about it in my conversations and lectures on Judaism on social media. I want to say about Moshe and Menashe. I think about the Nun. I think according to the Talmud, this story was with Gershom, Yehonatan ben Gershom, who was the grandson of Moshe. But for the sake of the honor of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not nice. The Tanakh should say that Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson was a servant, a priest for Avodah Zarah. So that's why this small opposite nun, this nun is hanging, was added. It refers supposedly to Menashe, the king of Judah, who was a famous idol worshiper, instead of Moshe. So I'm done.
That's beautiful. That is actually a very, very beautiful answer. I appreciate it. It's absolutely beautiful. But yes, again, it's amazing. There's hidden subtleties, like I say, we have to sometimes literally read between the lines, and this one is we have to read literally between the letters. But it's if you follow the lineage, it's absolutely Ben Moshe. But again, thank you. That was beautiful. I appreciate it. Thank you. And sometimes Phil, if I'll just go back and just mention, there are a lot of things that we don't understand that is very hard for us to conceptualize today. Like there's the the punishment of being stoned for breaking certain rules. We can't we can't conceptualize that, like for a particular avera, what the punishment was. But it was, when we're reading it, it was at a time that it alluded to the seriousness, let's say, of the crime. So you'll have certain societies that will, cut off a hand or something. And in that society, it alludes to using or making it inability to it's inexcusable. There is no ways of going around about it. You break it, there's no way, there is no, you don't have a defense. You know what I mean? And right or wrong for our society to put our norms or mores on them, we can't do that. And we see that it doesn't work. Simple time, Iraq is a great example. The states, how do you call it? When they invaded Iraq, they're going to bring democracy to that place. We grew up with democracy. We understand what democracy is, and yet it won't work there. It does. How is it that doesn't work? The certain society, they're just not built with that type of mentality, and you can see it reverts back after what we're trying to, what one society is trying to create to another might not necessarily work. And again, I'm not saying that not trying was good or should have we tried, etc. That's a different discussion. I just want to use that as an example in our times, that what we simply see as, who wouldn't want to have democracy? That you can vote, you can decentralize power and bring all the good that comes with it, etc. And there's some societies simply that with over millenniums of being living a certain way, that is how they do it, and you can't change it. It'll take who knows how long before certain things change. And the same way, there are certain ways of conquering, certain way. You see right now, they didn't have the laws of engagement of war that we have now. You can't right now pillage or take the spoils or do with women or with children as you wish. Take them as slaves and rape whoever you wish. It just doesn't work that way today. We've come a long way, but in you go back millennia, it was certain things were normal, were done very differently. But part of God's instruction was that there was to be no strangers there were strangers, yes, but there was going to be no peoplehood that follow other idols or follow other gods were to be wiped away. And that is part, by the way, of this entire story that we're reading the last chapters, was an allusion to this as well. This is what happened when they left. They were still, they were affected by it. And when they were left alone, when they were disconnected, so to speak, from centralized religion, because they lived far away, there was no way to communicate. What was the fallback? They still learned from the people who were around them. And I saw Peter want to raise his hand.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the Nun and ask you a question about judges in general. Was it first oral and then written? If it was first oral, the difference between Ben Moshe and Ben Manasseh is an oral distinction, which probably wouldn't be made. If it was written as it is, you can start arguing what you're proposing, that it was in essence a sign, but a visual written sign of a complicated relationship of that particular phrase. So I'm interested in, when were judges written? Were they first oral histories and then written down? And if so, I think the floating nun is really only meaningful in its written form.
So I hear you totally. By the way, I just wanted to show you, sometimes within the text, if you saw that they were blue, they gives you a little bit Menashe, Hebrew Menashe with the nun suspended, indicating an earlier reading Moses. So,
right.
In reference to 222, it was definitely transmitted first orally. There's no question about it. Okay. I remember I had it. I don't have it right now when actually it was canonized into written works. But originally it was absolutely passed down orally. And that is also why even in the Torah, certain things were passed around, and I'm sure also was not passed in the same format that we know. And then what I mean by that is when they got to certain passages, it's almost, unless they were using it in a clerical way, not in a teaching way or in a transmission way, sometimes they actually had to explain what a particular word meant, or else it may have sounded off. In other words, it could have been open for description or for interpretation. And anytime that there is an aberration, something like this with a suspended nun, chances are that it was transmitted with an asterisk. In other words, when they got to this word, the transmitter would have to actually explain what it was. And then eventually when they actually wrote it down, when it was actually put down on parchment paper or whatever it might have been, then they started, okay, how do we shorthand that explanation with what? And then they came up with all these, a big aleph, a small yud, and in this case, it was a suspended nun.
Great explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that is how eventually it got into it, because it certainly was first orally. And I see Stephen has a question. Yes, so make sure you unmute yourself, Stephen. Unmute yourself first, Stephen. Go ahead.
The only comment I wanted to make when you referred to the fact that we had to think in the context of the times, and they raped the women and they grabbed the children. It's exactly what Russia is doing today. There's no difference. They raped the women and they grabbed and kidnapped the children.
Yeah.
We didn't advance very much.
Yeah, in certain societies, you're absolutely right, and it's how sad it is. How sad it is. Let me just show you what we are talking about. So if you remember, we're talking about the Sidonim, okay? Look where Dan is. What area we're talking about? Anybody notices?
Upper north.
Well, Sandra, it's near it would be near contemporary Tel Aviv.
Yes, but look what it is. It's a lot of it was
On the water, yeah.
out on the water. So this was they were merchants. They were the Sidonites were known as I guess they part of that, not living or connected to the people, maybe not within the land, but that they set off. They would go elsewhere. And they traded. They were very successful. By the way, also arts people. They had quite beautiful art. They were very creative in architecture, in building. It was a sophisticated. It was not some just tent dwellers, and these were very it was an organized society that they actually had the ability of going elsewhere and sharing with the world, so to speak.
Is the video on?
That they were able to share with other societies. And here you see that Dan was not actually landlocked, but has actually had also access to the ports. And as rightfully, Michael, as you said, the most famous port in Israel, in those days at least, was Yaffo, right?
Yeah.
What story takes place in Yaffo? We read it Yom Kippur.
Is that supposed to be Nineveh, or the launching point to Nineveh? Yonah?
Henry, what did you say? Yonah takes off from Jaffa. So you're right, Michael, Jaffa. So this is a port that's now, of course, it can't. Although there's are little ships still there, like fishing vessels, etc., but very personal ships. We're not talking about these big, huge. They can't take the new containers, etc. But it was a port. It was a fishing, and then that's where how do you call it? That's where things came in. So Dan was also sailors. Yes, Henry.
Yosi, could you show me again where Dan is? Because I have a map, and in this map, it's the area above Naphtali.
Yeah, it's right here. I have. Do you see it?
Basically, where Tel Aviv Jaffa is today, plus somewhat south.
Oh, it's right there.
It's in the green.
Yeah.
Again, you can look at in this case on the left-hand map. I just wanted to show you that there's never two real maps that are exactly the same. It just gives you an idea. This wasn't pinpointed by laser and with how do you call it, the accuracy that we have here with satellites, and they within 10 feet they can tell you exactly where the border was. And just to give you an idea, kind of within the land where it was, and here you see it. You see it was in on the left-hand side, it's in orange. Do you see it?
Yeah, but it's much clearer on the right-hand side, obviously.
Yeah, that's why I showed it. Yeah, but I want to show you that it's not always identical, but it's roughly the same. If you look at Binyamin, if you look at the yellow, you see it?
Yep.
It's not quite the same, but it's the general area of where it is. This is not in Eilat. Binyamin is Jerusalem, that central part of Israel. You see where Ephraim is, etc. But in where Yehuda is, it just an idea of showing you Dan had that access to, and that is why perhaps they likened it to the Sidonites, that they were Sidonim. They saw some kind of similarities between that society that lived in Laish and the Sidonim. Okay.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
What accounts for the fact that Manasseh is such a large territory relative to Dan, Ishkar, Zebulun, and Benjamin that are relatively small?
So it was given, as we mentioned, by lots.
Yep.
It was given by lots. So Menashe, Gad, and Reuven, okay, was which is on the right-hand side. If you look at it, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, that was a total different. It was actually not originally supposed to be in the picture, but if you remember, as they were crossing into, they asked to get that as an inheritance because they liked the land. They saw this is where they want to live. It matched what they were looking for. Okay,
Right.
God actually granted it to them as long as they came in and helped the rest of the nation conquer the land. But it was done by lots. And part of the reason why Menashe is because that was the blessing that Yaakov gave Menashe. He gave Joseph, that you'll get twice. And if you look at it, it's a very, very big, large. They received a really large nachala, really large inheritance.
Right, plus it's had to be split so that there's that connection.
Yeah, exactly. But I hope what the point of the last two chapters is not just about the story, but that it gives you a little bit of an insight in terms of the build-up to let's say the next book that we'll get into, and how the Jews are sinning, how the Israelites are sinning, how later on the north and the south start breaking up because of the way they are practicing the religion, but understanding how splintered, we look at it today as Israel, and we look at it and maybe Phil, this is also a great part of the answer is we're looking at it with goggles today that we know the entire land is connected. There's a central government and this is what they do and and there's a reigning body and how rules are made and how the religion that didn't really exist. It existed better actually in the desert when they were all together, living in a much small, under a much more controlled environment. Once they were actually given reign of a much bigger area of land, they were not traveling together, so to speak, anymore, if you want to look at it as in that way. Whereas in the desert, they're traveling together. They all went somewhat separate ways, not necessarily because they had bad intentions, but perhaps because they simply didn't know better or lost their way, or they just didn't have the leadership or the connection to the central part. Maybe that's the best way of saying it. They kind of went on a tangent, and that is a build up to the later chapters of what's happening. And that it's almost kind of like a Tarantino movie where at the end you kind of realize what was at the beginning. So after all the shoftim, it kind of tells you now you understand why the land was in such a disarray because of the disconnect and how slowly everybody went on their own. Dan was, they were pursuing their land. There's no mention of what God did or what Ephraim was doing or what Menashe or Zvulun or Issachar. They were focused on what they needed to do. And Issachar didn't come down and tell Dan, what are you doing? That's not how you're supposed to do the religion. Why? Because Issachar, all the way up in the north, if you see, they were dealing with their stuff. They were trying to set up their families and set up their society. And Zvulun was doing their own stuff, and Shimon was doing their own stuff. Yehuda was, because they were not yet connected one with another. In other words, they were looking for their own. And through that, they lost some of their connection as well. And I think that's really the importance that I want you to take away with it, because then it'll put the upcoming chapters, the upcoming books as well, we understand it much better in terms of context. Okay.
Very good.